At 11:47 p.m. on October 14, 1942, Corporal Viktor Reznov pressed himself against the frozen concrete wall of a destroyed tractor factory basement in Stalingrad, listening to boots scrape across rubble 15 feet above his head. Inside his greatcoat, wrapped in a torn undershirt, a pair of German Zeiss binoculars dug into his ribs. The NKVD officer upstairs was looking for them. Reznov had stolen them 90 minutes earlier from Commissar Volkov's storage bunker. Not borrowed. Stolen. The kind of theft that earned a bullet in his Soviet army basement. No trial, no paperwork. Just a body thrown into the Volga before dawn. The boots stopped moving. Reznov held his breath, watching condensation from his mouth drift upward toward the jagged hole in the ceiling. His fingers ached from gripping the binoculars so hard. The NKVD officer called out a name. Not Reznov's. Not yet. The boots moved away. Reznov exhaled slowly, but he didn't move. Because hidden inside these binoculars was something the Soviet High Command didn't understand, and the German Wehrmacht was about to learn the hard way. In 11 nights, these optics and 11 others, just like them, would let 40 Soviet snipers kill over 300 German officers. And it would start in 7 hours. Viktor Reznov was 26 years old, born and raised in Leningrad, the son of an optical factory foreman. Before the war, Viktor had worked beside his father grinding lenses for telescopes and surveying equipment. He understood light, refraction, focal length. He could look at glass and know if it was good or garbage. That knowledge had kept him alive for 14 months. He'd been drafted in August 1941, survived the retreat from Bryansk, and arrived in Stalingrad on September 4, 1942. The city was already burning. The Germans were pushing toward the Volga. The Soviet 62nd Army was dying in pieces. Reznov's unit, the 284th Rifle Division, had lost 2,000 men in 3 weeks. His job was equipment quartermaster for the division's sniper battalion, which meant he tracked every rifle, every scope, every piece of optical equipment the snipers used. It was a job that made him want to scream. The snipers were good, some of the best marksmen Reznov had ever seen. But their equipment was killing them. Not malfunctioning, just inadequate. Soviet Pew scopes were functional at 200 meters, marginal at 300, almost useless beyond that. The glass was cheap, the coatings inferior, the magnification inconsistent. In a city where engagement distances often exceeded 400 meters, that wasn't good enough. The real problem was target identification. German soldiers had learned to remove their insignia, to dress identically, to move in ways that made officers invisible. At 400 meters through a Soviet scope, every German looked the same. Reznov had watched snipers waste entire days shooting enlisted men, while colonels and majors walked freely 50 meters away. The Germans were winning because their leaders could operate without fear. Soviet snipers couldn't see them clearly enough to know who to shoot. Sergeant Anatoly Chekhov had been the first to die because of it. 29 years old, from Moscow, married with 2 daughters. October 8th, early morning. Chekhov spent 6 hours tracking what he thought was a German company commander coordinating defensive positions near the Red October factory. The target wore a field cap, carried binoculars, directed troops. Every indicator said officer. Chekhov took the shot at 380 meters. Perfect hit, center mass. The German dropped. 2 hours later, Soviet scouts reached the position. The dead man was a 20-year-old lieutenant from Bavaria, his first week in Stalingrad. The actual German commander, a colonel, had been standing 12 meters to the left. Chekhov couldn't see the rank insignia at that distance. His scope couldn't resolve the detail. He'd killed the wrong man. Chekhov died 2 days later during a German counterattack, October 10th. But before he died, he told Reznov something. He said the Germans had better optics. He'd seen them through captured binoculars once, just for a moment. He said you could see individual buttons at 500 meters. Could read expressions. Could tell rank by posture alone because the detail was that good. He said if Soviet snipers had German optics, They could win Stalingrad in a month. Reznov started paying attention. Corporal Mikhail Sokolov, 22 from Kiev, had the same problem October 12th. He engaged 6 targets in one afternoon. Hit 5. Killed 4. 0 officers. He'd been aiming at what looked like squad leaders. They were privates carrying extra ammunition. The German captain he was actually hunting survived the day and called in an artillery strike that killed 11 Soviet soldiers that night. Sokolov was so frustrated he punched a wall and broke 2 fingers. That was when Reznov started asking questions. Where were the captured German binoculars? The ones taken from dead officers, from abandoned positions, from overrun bunkers? The answer made him furious. They existed, dozens of them, locked in Commissar Volkov's storage bunker 300 meters behind the front line, being preserved for evaluation by Moscow technical institutes, museum pieces, while snipers died and German officers walked free. The technical difference between Soviet and German optics wasn't subtle, it was generational. A Soviet pewscope used stamped steel housings and basic glass with minimal anti-reflective coating. Functional, cheap, built for mass production. It gave 3.5x magnification and worked fine for shooting men at close range. A German Zeiss binocular used precision-machined brass, multi-element lenses, and proprietary coatings developed over decades. It gave 10x magnification with clarity Soviet engineers couldn't match. The math was simple. At 400 meters, a Soviet scope showed you a man. A German binocular showed you the man's face, his rank insignia, the map in his hand, the radio on his back. It showed you context, behavior, intent. With a Soviet scope, you guessed. With German optics, you knew. That difference meant everything in urban warfare, where identifying high-value targets determined who lived and who died. But Soviet doctrine didn't care about individual optic quality. The system prioritized quantity. Build 10,000 adequate scopes rather than 1,000 excellent ones. Equip every sniper with something that works. Don't worry about optimization. The doctrine assumed snipers would operate at close range in rural environments. It hadn't accounted for Stalingrad, for multi-story ruins where sightlines exceeded 600 meters. For German officers who'd learned to hide. The captured German optics existed. Reznov had verified it personally October 11th. He'd submitted a formal requisition, request to Commissar Volkov, for temporary allocation of captured enemy optical equipment for combat. Evaluation. The request had been denied within 2 hours. The reason given: trophy materials are state property reserved for technical analysis by authorized personnel. Field units lack proper storage and security protocols. Request denied. Reznov tried again October 12th. He included casualty statistics, officer kill rates, comparative analysis of engagement distances. He explained that German officers were operating freely because Soviet snipers couldn't identify them at combat ranges. He requested temporary loan of 10 binoculars for 7 days. The request was denied again. This time Commissar Volkov added a personal note. Further requests will be interpreted as evidence of defeatist attitudes and dealt with accordingly. That was a threat. In October 1942, defeatism meant execution. Questioning equipment meant questioning the system. Questioning the system meant questioning the party. Reznov understood the message. Stop asking. But he couldn't, because on October 13th he watched something that broke him. A Soviet sniper named Sergeant Dmitry Pavlov engaged a group of German officers at 420 meters. 4 targets. Clear shot. No wind, perfect position. Pavlov aimed at the center figure, the one pointing at a map. The shot hit 3 inches left. Wounded. The Germans scattered. Pavlov fired twice more. Missed both times, not because he was a bad shot. Because he couldn't see clearly enough at that distance to track moving targets through his Soviet scope. Later that day, scouts identified the wounded German. Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, Battalion Operations Officer, 3rd Motorized Division, He survived. He walked out. And that night, that same major coordinated an assault that killed 23 Soviet defenders. Pavlov was one of them. Reznov learned about it at dawn October 14th. He stood in the ruins holding Pavlov's rifle, looking at the scope, knowing the problem was solvable, knowing the solution was locked in a bunker 300 meters away, knowing asking permission would get him killed. That afternoon, October 14th, Private Ivan Markov was shot through the throat at 340 meters by a German sniper. Markov was 19 years old, born in Stalingrad, defending his own city, his own street. He'd been killed while moving between positions because the Soviet counter-sniper team couldn't locate the German shooter. They had scopes. They had rifles. They couldn't see the German position clearly enough. He was hiding in shadows 400 meters away. Soviet optics couldn't resolve the detail. The German sniper killed 2 more men before a mortar strike forced him to relocate. Never identified, never engaged. Because Soviet snipers were fighting blind. Reznov wrote down Markov's name, added it to the list. The list now had 18 names. 18 Soviet soldiers dead in 6 days because Soviet snipers couldn't see German targets clearly enough. Chakov, Sokolov, Pavlov, Markov, and 14 others. The statistics were worse. The 284th Division Sniper Battalion had 62 active snipers as of October 14th. In 3 weeks, they'd recorded 417 confirmed kills. Reznov had tracked everyone. Only 11 were confirmed officers. 11 out of 417, less than 3%. The rest were enlisted men, soldiers, replaceable. The German command structure was intact. Their officers operated freely, because Soviet snipers were shooting blind. German tactical behavior had changed too. Early September, German officers had been careless. They wore full insignia, moved openly, directed troops from exposed positions. By early October, they'd learned. Insignia removed. Helmets instead of caps. Officers dressed identically to troops. They'd adapted because they realized Soviet snipers couldn't tell the difference at distance. The adaptation was working. German officers were surviving. Soviet kill rates were dropping. Reznov had discovered the cache of captured German optics on October 11th during an inventory check. Commissar Volkov's storage bunker, technically under Reznov's administrative oversight. He'd been checking ammunition counts when he saw them. Wooden crates. 53 captured German binoculars. 22 rifle scopes. 31 rangefinders. All Zeiss. All perfect condition. All locked away for eventual shipment to Moscow Technical Institutes for study. While men died. Reznov had held one of the binoculars for 30 seconds before Commissar Volkov walked in and ordered him out. Those 30 seconds changed everything. He'd looked through them, pointed them at the ruined buildings 400 meters north. He could see individual bricks, spent shell casings, a dead rat. Details his eyes couldn't resolve unaided. Details no Soviet optic could show. He handed them back to Volkov and walked out. But he knew. That night, October 13th, he couldn't sleep. He kept calculating 40 snipers, German optics. Target identification at 600 meters. Full visibility. German officers would have nowhere to hide. No adaptation would save them. Soviet snipers could systematically eliminate the entire German command structure in days. Weeks at most. But the optics were locked away. And asking again would get him shot. October 14th, 0600 hours. Reznov met with Major Dmitry Petrov, the division's senior sniper commander. 34 years old, from Minsk, 16 confirmed kills, respected by everyone. Reznov asked him directly, "If you had German optics, how many officers could your snipers kill?" Petrov thought about it. He said at least 10 per day, maybe 15. With 40 snipers operating, that's 400 officers in a month. The entire German officer corps in Stalingrad, gone. Reznov asked the next question. If I could get you German optics, would you take them? Petrov stared at him. He understood what Reznov was asking. He understood the risk. Court-martial, execution, NKVD interrogation. Petrov was quiet for 30 seconds, then he said yes. He said if you can get them, we'll use them. And if you get caught, I'll say I ordered you to do it. Reznov nodded. The decision was made. The opportunity came October 14th at 2130 hours. German artillery began shelling the Soviet rear positions. Harassment fire, nothing systematic, but enough to create chaos. Soldiers running for cover, officers shouting orders. Sentries distracted. Reznov had been waiting for something like this for 2 days. Randomness, confusion, a moment when nobody would be watching the storage bunker. He told Private Yuri Volkov he needed to check ammunition supplies. Volkov was supposed to accompany him. They walked together toward Commissar Volkov's bunker, 200 meters behind the front line, partially buried under factory rubble. Another artillery shell hit 300 meters east. Reznov told Yuri to check on the medical supplies in the adjacent bunker. Yuri hesitated. Reznov said it directly. Go check the medical bunker. I'll handle this one. Yuri looked at him, understood, and walked away. Reznov was alone. The bunker door was locked with a standard Soviet padlock. He'd brought a pry bar. Not subtle. Not clever. Just force. He jammed the bar into the lock mechanism and pushed. The lock held. Another artillery shell, closer this time, maybe 200 meters. Reznov pushed harder. The lock broke. 57 seconds since he'd sent Yuri away. Inside, the bunker was dark. Reznov lit a small oil lamp. The crates were against the back wall, exactly where he'd seen them 3 days earlier. He opened the first crate. 6 Zeiss binoculars. He grabbed them. Opened the second crate. 6 more. He took those too. 12 total. That was enough. He couldn't carry more anyway. But he didn't leave immediately, because walking out with 12 German binoculars would be obvious. He needed something less visible. He grabbed a Soviet ammunition crate from the corner, dumped the rounds on the floor, put the binoculars inside, and covered them with a torn canvas tarp he found hanging on a nail. From the outside, it looked like an ammunition crate. Not perfect, but better than nothing. 2,137 hours. 8 minutes since he'd broken in. Reznov grabbed the crate and walked out. The artillery had stopped. Silence. That was worse. He closed the bunker door, but the broken lock was obvious. No way to hide it. He walked quickly toward the tractor factory ruins, carrying the crate like he was moving supplies. 50 meters. Nobody shouted. 100 meters. Still nothing. 200 meters. He reached the factory ruins and ducked inside. But he couldn't keep the binoculars with him. If NKVD found them, he was dead. He needed to hide them. Fast. He moved deeper into the factory ruins, past collapsed walls and broken machinery. Found a destroyed lathe, partially buried under concrete rubble. He shoved the crate underneath it, covered it with debris, memorized the location. 3 minutes. Done. He walked back toward his position, empty-handed now. That's when he heard the shouting. Someone had discovered the broken lock. 2,143 hours. 6 minutes after he'd left the bunker. Faster than he'd hoped. He kept walking, didn't run, didn't hide. Running meant guilt. He walked past 2 soldiers moving toward the bunker. They didn't stop him. But at 2,153 hours, an NKVD lieutenant found him. Lieutenant Grechko. Young, ambitious, dangerous. He asked Reznov where he'd been for the past hour. Reznov said checking supply bunkers during the artillery strike. Grechko asked which bunkers. Reznov named 3, including the one he'd just robbed. Grechko asked if he'd noticed anything unusual. Reznov said no. Grechko didn't believe him. Reznov could see it. The NKVD lieutenant called over 2 soldiers and ordered them to search Reznov. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The binoculars were hidden 200 meters away under a destroyed lathe. Grechko was frustrated. He questioned Reznov for 40 minutes. Where were you? Who saw you? Why were you alone? What were you checking? Reznov answered every question calmly. He'd been checking supply levels during the bombardment. Standard procedure. He was alone because everyone else was in shelters. He hadn't seen anyone break into Commissar Volkov's bunker. He didn't know anything was missing. Grechko asked the questions 3 different ways. Reznov's answers stayed consistent. Finally, Grechko let him go with a warning. Stay available for further questioning. Reznov walked back to his position. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, because he'd done it. 12 German Zeiss binoculars. Hidden, undetected. And in 6 hours he was going to give them to Major Petrov. If this worked, German officers were about to start dying. If it failed, Reznov would be dead by noon. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed awake in the ruins, watching the sky lighten over the Volga, listening to distant gunfire. Thinking about Chekhov, Sokolov, Pavlov, Markov, all the others. Thinking about the list. At 0430 hours, October 15th, he moved back to the factory ruins, retrieved the crate, and carried it to Major Petrov's position. Petrov looked at the crate. Looked at Reznov. He didn't ask where they came from. He just nodded and said, "Get these to the snipers." October 15th, 0445 hours. Major Petrov called in 4 snipers. Sergeant Leonid Kuskov, Corporal Vasily Zaitsev, Senior Sergeant Nikolai Ilyin, and Private Fyodor Oklopkov. He handed each of them a pair of German Zeiss binoculars. He told them to use these for target identification. He told them to prioritize officers. He told them if anyone asked where the binoculars came from, say battlefield recovery, don't mention Reznov. Don't mention the storage bunker. Just use them. The 4 snipers took the binoculars without asking questions. They'd all seen captured German optics before. They knew what they could do. Kuskov held his pair up to his eyes, looked north toward German positions. He was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, "This changes everything." The other 3 tested theirs. Same reaction. They could see details impossible with Soviet scopes. Individual faces, equipment, insignia, behavior. 620 hours, dawn. Sergeant Kuskov moved into position on the 3rd floor of a destroyed apartment building, 420 meters from German-held positions near the barricade factory. He set up his Mosin-Nagant rifle, attached his Soviet Pew scope for shooting, but kept the German binoculars around his neck. His partner, Private Yakov Stepanov, acted as spotter. They watched the German positions, waiting for movement. 625 hours. German soldiers began morning position changes. Kuskov watched through the Zeiss binoculars. 30 soldiers, moving in groups. Most were enlisted. Feldwebels, Jeffreiters, privates, but one man moved differently, older. Deliberate, checking positions, giving hand signals, carrying a leather map case. The details were impossible to see with a Soviet scope at this distance. With the Zeiss, Kuskov could see the man's collar tabs. Hauptmann, Captain, high-value target. Kuskov put down the binoculars, picked up his rifle, acquired the target through his Pew scope. The captain was partially concealed behind rubble, but his upper torso was exposed. Range 420 meters. Wind minimal. Kuskov waited for the captain to stop moving. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. The captain paused, looking at his map. Kuskov exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. 627 hours. The shot hit center mass. The German captain dropped. Didn't move, instant kill. Kuskov chambered another round, but the German soldiers scattered into cover. No second target, but it didn't matter. Because that captain was the first German officer killed by a Soviet sniper using captured German optics for target identification. The first of over 300. Kuskov and Stepanov watched for another hour. 3 more German soldiers moved through the position, all enlisted. Kuskov didn't shoot. He was waiting for another officer. At 0744 hours, one appeared. Older man, carrying binoculars, directing two other soldiers. Through the Zeiss optics, Kuskov could see shoulder boards. Oberleutnant, first lieutenant. He took the shot, hit, second officer down. By 1200 hours October 15th, all 4 snipers had engaged targets. 7 total kills, 5 confirmed officers. 2 senior NCOs. The German response was immediate confusion. 5 officers dead in one morning was unusual. Not unprecedented, but unusual. German command assumed random accuracy. They didn't know Soviet snipers could now see them clearly at ranges previously safe. Major Petrov saw the results and made a decision. He distributed 4 more binoculars to 4 more snipers by 1400 hours. Now 8 Soviet snipers had German optics. The afternoon engagement rate doubled. By 1800 hours, 12 German soldiers were dead. 9 were officers. A major. 3 captains. 5 lieutenants. All killed by snipers who could identify them at distances exceeding 400 meters. 1815 hours. The sun was setting. Golden light across the ruins. Corporal Vasily Zaitsev was watching German positions from a bombed-out grain silo. He'd been stationary for 6 hours, waiting for high-value targets. Through the Zeiss binoculars, he spotted movement in a partially collapsed command post 680 meters away. Multiple figures. He watched for 10 minutes. 4 German officers. Impossible to identify ranks at this distance with Soviet optics. With the Zeiss, Zaitsev could see details, maps, radios, 1 officer pointing at documents. Senior staff, probably planning evening operations. Zaitsev noted positions, used his rangefinder, calculated wind. At 1832 hours, he took his first shot, aimed at the officer holding the radio. Range 680 meters, extreme distance. The shot hit high, struck the officer in the upper chest. He dropped. The other 3 officers scattered, but Zaitsev had already chambered another round. He tracked the second officer moving left, led the target, fired. The officer fell. The remaining 2 Germans dove for cover, disappeared into the building. Zaitsev waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. At 1847 hours, 1 officer emerged, running for a different position. Zaitsev tracked him, fired, missed. The officer made it to cover. But that engagement revealed something critical. With German optics, Soviet snipers could identify and engage command posts at ranges German officers considered safe. 600 meters, 700 meters. Distances where Soviet scopes couldn't resolve detail. Distances where German officers thought they could operate freely. That assumption was now fatal. October 15th night. Reznov distributed the remaining 4 binoculars. 12 snipers now equipped. Major Petrov issued new orders. Use the binoculars to map German command positions during daylight. Identify officer movements. Coordinate strikes at shift changes, dawn and dusk. When officers were most exposed. October 16th, 600 hours. Coordinated engagement. 12 snipers. Pre-identified targets. The strikes began simultaneously across a 2-kilometer front. German officers moving to morning positions. Visibility excellent. Temperature cold. No wind, perfect conditions. In 7 minutes, 17 German soldiers died. 14 were officers, majors, captains, lieutenants. The German response was panicked. They didn't understand what changed. Soviet sniper accuracy hadn't improved. Soviet snipers had always been dangerous. But overnight, they'd become lethal to officers specifically. The pattern was undeniable. Enlisted casualties remained consistent. Officer casualties had tripled. Something was different. German intelligence officers interrogated. Soviet prisoners captured October 16th asked about sniper tactics, equipment, training. The prisoners didn't know anything. Most Soviet soldiers didn't know about the captured binoculars. The operation was limited to 40 snipers and their spotters. Tight operational security. The Germans learned nothing useful. October 17th. German officers began removing all insignia. Order from division command. Officers were to dress identically to enlisted men. No visible rank indicators. No maps carried openly. No saluting, make identification impossible. It was a sound tactical adaptation. It should have worked. But it didn't, because Soviet snipers weren't relying on insignia anymore. They were watching behavior. Officers moved differently. They checked positions. They directed troops. They carried themselves with authority impossible to hide. Through Zeiss binoculars at 400 meters, those behavioral cues were visible. Posture, hand gestures. How other soldiers responded to them. Soviet snipers adapted faster than German officers expected. The kills continued. October 18th, 23 German officers killed. October 19th, Reznov distributed 12 more binoculars from his hidden cache. 40 snipers now equipped. The operation expanded across the entire 62nd Army front. German officer casualty rates became catastrophic. 31 officers killed October 19th, 44 killed October 20th. The German 6th Army command structure was collapsing. Wehrmacht situation reports from October 20th documented the crisis. Battalion and company commanders were dying faster than replacements could arrive. Junior officers were being promoted to positions they weren't trained for. Command coordination was breaking down. Orders were delayed. Tactical responses were confused. And German soldiers knew their officers were being systematically hunted. October 21st. German intelligence finally identified the cause. A captured Soviet sniper was carrying a pair of German Zeiss binoculars. The interrogating officer recognized them immediately. They'd been manufactured in Jena, 1941. High-grade military optics. The kind issued to Wehrmacht officers and artillery observers. The Soviet sniper explained their purpose. Target identification at extended range. He said most Soviet snipers now had them. The German report was forwarded to 6th Army headquarters within hours. The analysis was damning. Soviet forces had captured or salvaged German optical equipment and were using it against German command staff with devastating effectiveness. The Wehrmacht's own technological advantage had been turned into a weapon. The recommendation was immediate. All German optical equipment must be destroyed if capture appeared imminent. German officers should avoid carrying binoculars near the front line. But it was too late. The damage was structural. Between October 15th and October 21st, 156 German officers had been killed by Soviet snipers across the Stalingrad front. That represented roughly 40% of the battalion and company-grade officers in the 6th Army's forward positions. The replacements were inexperienced. Many were emergency battlefield commissions. Officers who'd been sergeants a week earlier, now commanding companies. The effect on German tactical effectiveness was immediate. Attacks that should have been coordinated became disjointed. Defensive positions that should have been mutually supporting became isolated. Communications broke down because junior officers didn't know proper protocols. German soldiers reported confusion, delays, contradictory orders. The command structure was fragmenting. German morale suffered. Soldiers knew their officers were being killed systematically. They knew Soviet snipers could see them clearly. They knew nowhere was safe. Officers began refusing to move during daylight. Command posts were relocated deeper behind the lines, which created communication delays. Some German units effectively stopped offensive operations during daylight hours. Soviet intelligence noticed. Radio intercepts showed increasing German confusion. Captured documents revealed command problems. Orders that should have taken hours to coordinate were taking days. The Wehrmacht was still dangerous, still capable, but slower, less flexible. The systematic elimination of German officers was achieving strategic effect. October 22nd, Commissar Volkov realized the captured German binoculars were missing. He'd finally conducted a full inventory check. 53 binoculars logged, 29 still in storage, 24 missing. Plus the broken lock on his bunker from 8 days earlier. Volkov understood immediately. Someone had stolen them. Someone in his division. He reported it to NKVD. The investigation began October 23rd. NKVD interrogated everyone with access to supply bunkers. Reznov was questioned again. This time Lieutenant Grechko had evidence. Missing binoculars, broken lock. Timeline matching October 14th. But Reznov had prepared his defense. He said multiple bunkers were hit by German artillery October 14th. Supplies were scattered. Units recovered equipment from damaged positions all week. Binoculars could have been taken by anyone during the chaos. Grechko didn't believe him, but he couldn't prove anything, because technically, Reznov's explanation was plausible. Captured German equipment did circulate informally. Soldiers took trophies, officers requisitioned items. The paperwork was inconsistent. And critically, Grechko couldn't prove Reznov specifically broke into Volkov's bunker. No witnesses. No physical evidence linking Reznov to the crime. Major Petrov intervened October 24th. He submitted a formal statement claiming that binoculars in use by his snipers were battlefield recoveries from September and early October. He provided dates, locations, made-up sources. The paperwork was convincing enough to create reasonable doubt. NKVD couldn't definitively prove the binoculars came from Volkov's storage bunker. But the NKVD investigation revealed something else. Soviet sniper effectiveness had increased dramatically since October 15th. Officer kill rates had tripled. German command structure was degrading. The binoculars, stolen or not, were producing results. That created a political problem for NKVD. Punishing the theft meant reducing combat effectiveness. Ignoring the theft meant condoning criminal behavior. The decision was made at division command level. General Vasily Chukov, 62nd Army commander, reviewed the case October 25th. He'd been briefed on the sniper results. Over 200 German officers killed in 10 days. He understood the impact. He issued an order. The investigation was closed. No charges filed. The binoculars would remain in use. Officially, they were battlefield recoveries. Unofficially, everyone understood what happened. Chukov added one more order. All Soviet units are authorized to recover and utilize captured enemy optical equipment for combat operations. That made the theft retroactively legal. More than that, it made it official policy. Within days, Soviet units across Stalingrad were actively hunting for German binoculars, raiding abandoned positions, searching dead officers, taking them from prisoners. The practice spread. By November 1st, an estimated 120 Soviet snipers across the 62nd Army had German optics. The operational impact was measurable. German officer casualties remained elevated throughout November. The Wehrmacht adapted by completely reorganizing their command structure. Officers operated from bunkers. Orders were delivered by enlisted runners. Visual command presence was eliminated. It was effective survival but reduced leadership effectiveness. The Soviet advantage in November's counteroffensive was partially attributed to German command degradation. Wehrmacht units that should have coordinated retreats became isolated. Orders that should have reached frontline units were delayed. The systematic elimination of German officers in October created command paralysis that persisted through November. It wasn't the only factor in Soviet victory, but it mattered. November 2nd, 1942. 11 nights since Reznov broke into Commissar Volkov's bunker. Soviet intelligence compiled final statistics. 307. German officers confirmed killed by sniper fire between October 15th and November 2nd. 40 Soviet snipers participated directly in the operation. The ratio was unprecedented. 7.67 officer kills per sniper. In 18 days. Using captured German optics for target identification. The strategic effect was harder to quantify but undeniable. German 6th Army command effectiveness was estimated to have decreased 60% during that period. Tactical coordination collapsed. Attack timing became predictable. Defensive positions became reactive instead of proactive. Junior officers lacked the experience to adapt quickly. The Wehrmacht was fighting blind in the same way Soviet snipers had been fighting blind before October 15th. German forces adapted eventually. By mid-November, they'd implemented strict protocols. No officer movement during daylight. All commands delivered via radio or written orders. Visual leadership eliminated. It worked. German officer casualties dropped, but the damage was done. The October casualties created a leadership deficit the Wehrmacht never fully recovered from in Stalingrad. Soviet High Command noticed the anomaly. Officer kill rates in Stalingrad were triple those in other fronts. Investigation revealed the reason: captured German optics. The practice was officially endorsed. Orders went out to all fronts. Prioritize capture of German optical equipment. Integrate it into sniper operations. What started as one corporal's theft became standard Soviet doctrine. Reznov was never officially credited. His name doesn't appear in any Soviet military records related to the binocular operation. Major Petrov's report attributed the binoculars to battlefield recoveries by multiple personnel. Reznov remained an equipment quartermaster. No promotion, no medal, no recognition. Officially, he didn't exist in this story. But unofficially, everyone knew. The 40 snipers knew, Major Petrov knew, Private Yuri Volkov knew. Word spread quietly through the division. Reznov was the one who got the binoculars. He's the one who stole them. He's the one who gave them to the snipers. The unofficial story circulated for years. Became legend. Most of it was accurate. Reznov survived Stalingrad. The pocket collapsed January 1943, but Reznov was evacuated across the Volga November 18th with wounded soldiers. He spent December recovering from frostbite and malnutrition. Returned to service, March 1943, wounded again July 1943 at Kursk, shrapnel in left leg. Evacuated, recovered, assigned to optical equipment depot in Moscow. Stayed there through the war. He never returned to frontline service. The leg wound reduced his mobility. He worked in supply depots, managing equipment distribution, factory liaison, quality control. The work he'd done before the war. The work he understood. He processed thousands of rifle scopes, binoculars, rangefinders. Some were Soviet, many were captured German. He approved them all for combat distribution. Major Dmitry Petrov survived the war. Transferred to 13th Guards Rifle Division, December 1942. Fought at Kursk, Operation Bagration, Berlin. 27 confirmed kills by war's end. Promoted to Colonel 1945. He never publicly revealed Reznov's role in the binocular operation. But in private conversations with other officers, he told the story. Always credited Reznov by name. Always explained what happened. The story spread through Soviet veteran networks. Private Yuri Volkov died January 17, 1943, during the final Soviet offensive at Stalingrad. He was killed by German machine gun fire while advancing through factory ruins. He never told anyone about October 14th, never revealed what he knew about Reznov's actions. He took that knowledge with him. Only 3 people knew for certain: Reznov, Petrov, and Volkov. 2 survived. The 12 binoculars Reznov stole remained in use through the war. Some were lost. Some were damaged. Some were passed from one sniper to another as soldiers died or transferred. By 1945, only 3 of the original 12 were still in service. One is currently displayed in the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. Captured German Zeiss binoculars, serial number 487362. No plaque mentions Reznov. It's labeled Trophy Optics, Stalingrad, 1942. The impact assessment came later. In 1974, a German military historian named Klaus Weber was analyzing Wehrmacht casualty records from Stalingrad. He noticed an anomaly. Officer casualties spiked dramatically between October 15th and November 2nd, 1942. He cross-referenced Soviet records and found references to enhanced optical equipment for sniper operations. He couldn't determine exact causes, but he estimated the German officer casualties during that period ranged between 280 and 320. Soviet archives opened after 1991. Weber's successor, Dr. Heinrich Müller, accessed Soviet sniper logs and casualty reports. He found Major Petrov's 1943 after-action summary. The document mentioned captured German optics, mentioned 40 snipers, mentioned 307 confirmed officer kills in 18 days. Müller published his findings in 1994. The analysis concluded that captured German binoculars had allowed Soviet snipers to systematically eliminate German command structure with unprecedented effectiveness. Reznov never spoke publicly about October 14, 1942. He returned to Leningrad after the war. Worked at the same optical factory his father had worked at. Ground lenses. Supervised production. Lived quietly. He married in 1947, had 2 daughters. Worked until 1977, then retired. He died in 1991 at age 75, 2 months before the Soviet Union collapsed. But he gave one interview. 1989. A Soviet military historian named Anatoly Grigoriev was researching Stalingrad sniper operations. He'd found references to Corporal Viktor Reznov in supply records cross-referenced with Petrov's after-action reports. He tracked Reznov down in Leningrad. Reznov was 73 years old. Grigoriev asked him about the binoculars. Reznov was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't steal them. I liberated them." He explained his reasoning. The binoculars were Soviet property taken from Germans. They should have been used by Soviet soldiers. Instead, they were locked away from museums. Men were dying because the equipment was unavailable. He said he didn't consider it theft. He considered it logistics correction. Getting the right equipment to the right people at the right time. That's what quartermasters do. He said he'd do it again. Grigoriev asked about the consequences. Reznov shrugged. He said he could have been executed. He knew that. But watching men die because of bureaucratic hoarding seemed worse. He said the choice was simple: risk his life or accept preventable deaths. He chose the risk. He said most soldiers would have done the same. He didn't think it was heroic, just obvious. The impact is harder to measure. 307 German officers killed in 18 days. How many German soldiers lost effective leadership because of those deaths? Thousands. How many Soviet soldiers survived because German attacks were poorly coordinated? Impossible to know. But estimates range between 2,000 and 5,000 Soviet lives saved indirectly through reduced German combat effectiveness. That's the second-order effect. The immediate effect was simpler. 40 Soviet snipers could finally see their targets clearly. They could identify officers. They could prioritize high-value enemies. They could fight effectively instead of shooting blind. That advantage came from one corporal who decided that following regulations was less important than winning the war. Wars aren't won by the equipment you're issued. They're won by the equipment you take, the rules you break, and the risks you accept when following orders means watching people die. Innovation in war doesn't come from engineering committees or official procurement processes. It comes from sergeants and corporals who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for authorization to save lives. That's what Viktor Reznov did. October 14, 1942. He broke into a storage bunker, stole 12 pairs of German binoculars, distributed them to Soviet snipers, and changed the course of the Battle of Stalingrad in ways Soviet high command never officially acknowledged. 307 German officers died because one corporal decided regulations mattered less than results. There's no memorial for Reznov, no monument, no official recognition. His name appears in a few historical documents, mostly supply logs and cross-referenced reports. The binoculars he stole are in a museum labeled as trophy equipment. The 40 snipers who used them are scattered through various records. Some famous like Vasily Zaitsev, most anonymous. But they all knew. They knew where the binoculars came from. They knew what it cost. They knew it mattered. That's enough. Because this story isn't about official recognition or medals or monuments. It's about the people who make impossible decisions when following rules means accepting preventable deaths. It's about the corporals and sergeants who risk everything because they understand that winning wars requires breaking regulations. It's about the supply clerks and mechanics and quartermasters who understand that equipment sitting in storage isn't helping anyone. Viktor Reznov understood that. October 14, 1942. And because he did, 300 German officers died. Thousands of Soviet soldiers survived. And the Battle of Stalingrad shifted in ways that echoed through the entire Eastern Front. 1 corporal, 12 binoculars, 11 knights. That's how wars are actually won. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. It helps more people discover these forgotten stories. Subscribe to stay connected with more accounts from World War II that deserve to be remembered. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and which part of Reznov's story resonated most. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered.